This week, we welcome back Noam Blum.
The culture of anti-Semitism being seen as a second degree bigotry in progressive circles, and one that always has to be paired with Islamophobia. There's no room for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There's always that 1-2.
Mm-hmm.
You can never just say this thing was bad. You always got to draw in other forms of hate. And that's a treatment that other very specific incidents that deal with a very specific group don't get. You know, the Dylan Roof shooting didn't turn into some kumbaya song about how all bigotry is bad. It was addressed specifically as racism against Black people because that's what it was.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. If you like our work and want to support us, the best way to do that is join Phetasy.com. You'll get access to behind-the-scenes content, outtakes, discounts on merch, and the ability to submit questions for some of our upcoming guests. Support your favorite scrappy little internet heroes at Phetasy.com. All right, I'm with Noam Blum, everybody. Welcome back to Walk-Ins Welcome. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Bridget. It's good to be here. It's been a while since we spoke.
I know it, and yet it feels like just yesterday because the world and time is a flat circle. How are you doing, by the way? Let's start with that.
These are it's a rough time for me and for everyone in any kind of situation that's comparable to mine. Family, friends in Israel, some of them in the military, including family members of mine. And you know how you'll come across something upsetting online, some kind of video that's upsetting, some kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
You get that kind of pit in your stomach. You kind of feel all icky. Imagine that stretched over, 18 days now?
Yeah.
Essentially, like, you wake up, you look at your phone for messages or whatever the news is, get that kind of acid pit in your stomach feeling, and just carry it around until you go to bed, basically.
I'm not even Jewish, and I've been so affected. So I cannot imagine what it's like to be Jewish, Palestinian. I mean, I don't want to exclude anyone who comes from that region because I have friends who are Palestinian, and I know that they're just in a pit. They are walking around with a pit in their stomach, and this craziest thing among all of the crazy things has been, and why I just can't even imagine what it's like to be Jewish, has been this kind of open anti-Semitism that I think a lot of us knew was lurking under the surface, but now feels free to be expressed.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between I knew it and I'm seeing it.
Right.
And there's also levels of degree where maybe on some level you thought, okay, some of these people have thoughts that are this bad, but even in the most extreme circumstance, will keep some of it to themselves.
Right.
But the atmosphere of sort of enablement of what I call rhetoric inflation has led a lot of people to just talk like that without meaning it, but also kind of grow close to the idea of like, well, what if we do violently decolonize Palestine? You know, why actually, now that I think of it, since I've been saying this for years, what is actually bad about doing it? You know, and Hassan Piker will say, well, you know, there's also settler babies, which he said on his podcast the other day.
Mm-hmm.
That's the end game of this like rhetorical downward spiral where you can say ever more extreme things and get a continuous pass, because in progressivism, that's the way it operates now, especially people of certain races and certain classes who are essentially, you know, like woke aristocrats and can say whatever they want in whatever tone they want, and everybody just nods and agrees.
Yeah, it's something I've really been pondering, and it kind of struck me last night when I was reading a piece, was the language of academia seems divorced from the language of the street. So as someone who's not an academic, I was always slightly unsettled by the way this is being interpreted in the street. Because and in this piece that I was reading, the revolutionary legitimacy of Hamas, and he was making the argument that basically it's Damir
Marusik, yeah.
Damir Marusik. He was making the argument that essentially the people who are kind of on the street are at least coherent in their view, because they're saying, no, this is what did you think decolonize meant? Did you think it meant we write them a strongly worded letter? And they seem more, they're violent revolutionaries versus these academics who are now squeamish and uncomfortable with what that actually means, but they won't necessarily walk their statements back either. It's like these mealy-mouthed statements we've been seeing from universities where they're trying to kind of play to their crowd.
Yes. And you're right. And that academic thing, there was a joke that someone said about the University of Chicago once, that the motto there was, sure, it works in practice, but how is it in theory? Right. And it is that. And it's a similar phenomenon to what happens online. It's where you're in an environment, like you said, where like you could just say anything. You could throw any theory out there, no matter how extreme, and often get interesting people say like, that does sound interesting. You should write a paper about that. You should get a grant to study it, and lose kind of touch of the actual real world context behind it. And that's exactly what happens online. You turn into a digital person that exists solely in computers. You're an NPC in a computer game that has 3 dialogue options and has no sense of any context. And death tolls are equal in terms of, well, this is the number that died on one side and this is the number that died on the other side. Context is irrelevant. I said this on another podcast. On average, this isn't true for every single person, but on average, if you look at the average civilian death in Gaza, the circumstances of such a death are that they died because of like collateral damage from an attack on a militant target or something of that sort. That is the sort of if you could see the circumstances of the death of every civilian in this conflict, most of the Palestinian civilians died in that way, as side victims of a war against sort of military or militant targets. If you look at the average Israeli civilian death, especially, since October 7th, we're talking either sort of like indiscriminate fire into civilian areas, or even much more common, the face-to-face, hand-to-hand, personal, individual butchery of people. And so if 100 had died like this and 100 had died like that, a lot of people here will say, well, see, like the sides are roughly equal, having zero regard for how the people are dying, why they're dying, whose fault it is that they're dying. Those questions sort of become irrelevant, especially when it's much easier to say, to sort of deliver this kind of generic, oh, war is bad, oh, both sides need to de-escalate, oh, we just need peace. That's so easy to say. It's also intellectually lazy, because you don't have to sit down and make a hard choice about what's right and whether or not it's worth saying what's right, even if, you don't get invited to a dinner party or your fellow faculty members give you dirty looks.
I've never really waded into this discussion, although in this instance, I've been very clear how I feel about things to the enragement of many people. But because I've never been there, and I think that people who have lived in Israel and been to Israel and have experienced that have a better idea and sense of reality. It was interesting, like in the fall, really right in the early moments after October 7th, the more nuanced and thoughtful stuff was coming from people who were Israeli. It was like the American takes were so flattened. Like you said, they were, I don't know. What is it like for you to witness all these people who have never, maybe in some instances, even left America, commenting on this with such knowledge?
I mean, it's especially people who have spent the past several years telling people to stay in their lane. Oh, you don't have a uterus? Shut up about abortion. Oh, you're white? Shut up about race. Oh, you're straight? Shut up about trans rights. Everything is about an extremely narrow lane of personal life experience, lived experience, as they like to call it, except for this one subject,
Right.
in which you can be lectured until next week by someone who isn't Jewish, hasn't been there, doesn't know anything about, couldn't find it on a map, lecture you about what is or isn't anti-Semitism, what is or isn't justifiable, what is or isn't a settlement. A lot of expertise being thrown around that is not even, I would even be okay if the people saying that knew something about this. There's a lot of people who know a lot about this and have opposite views of it than I do.
Right.
And that's fine. I've been saying for years, all I want is for your opinion to be informed. If it's informed and you still disagree with me, like when we're looking at the same facts and we both, because of our worldviews or because of our faith in people's behavior or something like that, will deduce like different conclusions about what that'll mean. But at that point, what are you going to do? Like the person acknowledges the same data set as you and just has different conclusions about what needs to be done about it, for example. But when people, quite literally don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. And an example of this is the term settler. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that term has a very specific meaning. It denotes people that live in very specific disputed areas. And there is whenever people talk about a peace agreement, the situation with the settlers refers very specifically to those people, right? Living in Judea and Samaria in disputed territories with the Palestinian Authority. It used to be the people who lived in the Gaza Strip and were forcefully removed by Israel in 2006. And in some places, it also refers to people who live on the Golan Heights, which is disputed with Syria, except that after the Syria war, that became a little less relevant because there wasn't really anybody there to like negotiate with or make gestures to. Calling the people in the kibbutzim near Gaza who got hit by Hamas settlers essentially implies that you think everybody in Israel is a settler. And then it no longer becomes about two-state solution, doesn't become about the 1967 borders. It becomes about get all of them out there. As Helen Thomas, the legendary White House press corps reporter, said on camera many years ago that essentially kind of ended her career, the Jews should get the hell out of Palestine, is what she said. Which is ironic because in the 30s, the slogan was the Jews should get the hell out of here and go to Palestine.
Right.
So I wish the Gentile world would decide where they want to deport all of us to. Is it to Europe or is it from Europe?
Yeah, it also seems like I just feel like words have kind of lost all meaning, and there's a lot of, as we've been fast and loose with the word genocide just in general, I feel like this is another instance where that's used. I'm not sure about the open air prison apartheid. I'm like, I don't feel like I know anything about apartheid, anything that I thought I knew.
I mean, once again, things have definitions, and those definitions are widened because of rhetoric inflation, because you're not gonna turn a lot of heads by using words that are less severe than genocide, than apartheid, than ethnic cleansing, which then, by the way, causes large amounts of indifference when a thing like that actually happens.
Right.
That's why a lot of the people who are decolonized Palestine type people are also they're not super keen on Ukraine. Some people are, but they're not super keen on Ukraine. A lot of them think that's U.S. aggression caused the Ukraine war. There is a little segment that is still like insisting that like Ukraine is comparable to the Palestinians if you want to like compare those two wars. Meanwhile, like Zelensky's on Israel's side. Russia and Hamas buy their drones from Iran. They buy the same drones from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's very inconvenient for the Israeli-Palestinian situation in like weak versus strong discourse, you got to invent a reason in which this is just like every other situation where a large colonial power oppressed some kind of ethnic minority.
Right.
I mean, even calling Israel a colony is a misuse of the word. They're a colony for who?
Right.
A colony is a territory that a country stakes in another place. The American colonies were England.
Right.
The military here was the British military. They paid taxes to the King of England. It was England. Israel was never subject to another country. You could argue that the British mandate was colonialism, even though it wasn't like they didn't bring like British citizens in to live there. In fact, they banned like Jews couldn't get there. They had to like sneak in on boats and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even that was just the carving up of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. So it never tracked in the same way that like colonies in sort of island nations or in South America or in Africa. Extremely different scenario. But again, calling somebody a settler, calling somebody a Zionist, a very easy way to just be like, well, those people were just settlers. Those people were just Zionists. I don't hate Jews. I only hate the Zionists. I only hate the settlers, which to me is the equivalent of saying, I don't hate black people. I just hate African Americans. I just hate the very specific group of them that live here and they should leave here. I'm not what are you talking about racist? I love Nigeria. That would be facially ridiculous if somebody said something like that. And yet you can like subgroup Jews and then go like, well, what do you expect? They're bad, so they get a machete.
I feel like for all of the internalized racism and internalized misogyny and internalized whiteness that we have been talking about and discussing over the past 8 years, that not enough talk was done to internalize anti-Semitism because it's bananas how open it is. There will be people online saying things like, I'm just asking questions. I'm not saying anything bad about the Jews. And then they'll be like, oh, if maybe we should think about who controls the media. I'm like, what?
Yeah, at that point, just wear it. Like what? It's kind of bizarre that there somebody who is that willing to say stuff like that publicly and unabashedly is still very afraid of being called an anti-Semite. Just say, yeah, sure, that's what I am. But you're extremely right, and it goes back to the culture of anti-Semitism being seen as a second degree bigotry in progressive circles. In 2019, when Ilhan Omar was facing a censor in the House over her various anti-Semitic comments, and Nancy Pelosi was strong-armed into like changing it from a direct condemnation of her statement into some kind of generalized statement about bigotry. And let me just read to you a little excerpt from that. Remember, this was something about anti-Semitism. Ilhan Omar said things that were anti-Semitic, apologized for them. There was a big controversy, and the Democrats were going to put out a message against anti-Semitism. And this is what they wrote. Whereas white supremacists in the United States have exploited and continue to exploit bigotry and weaponized hate for political gain, targeting traditionally persecuted peoples, including African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and other people of color, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, and others with verbal attacks, incitement, and violence. So Ilhan Omar said something anti-Semitic, and what they did was put out a statement about how white supremacists oppress everyone and put Jews like 8th on their 16-thing list, right? And to that turned anti-Semitism into a secondary kind of bigotry, and one that always has to be paired with Islamophobia. I did a thread at this time too, with every statement about it. Bernie Sanders, everyone in the squad, the Prime Minister of England. There were lots and lots of people like that. Elizabeth Warren, and all of them use the phrase anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There's no room for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There's always that 1-2. You can never just say this thing was bad. You always got to draw in other forms of hate. And that's a treatment that other very specific incidents that deal with a very specific group don't get. You know, the Dylan Roof shooting didn't turn into some kumbaya song about how all bigotry is bad. It was addressed specifically as racism against Black people because that's what it was.
Right.
And it was called that. This also happens sometimes, you know, like with the Pulse shooting, that they kept arguing was a hate crime against gay people as opposed to an Islamic terrorist attack. The Obama administration at the time censored the word ISIS from the guy's like declaration of fealty to ISIS. They put it out with the word was the word Allah, I think, was redacted. It said like, I pledge allegiance to blank.
Oh, geez.
Right. And so, but the downstream effects of these little things, it's a little thing there. It's a little thing there. Right. The downstream effect of that is what you see now, is the idea that anti-Semitism is not a big problem. Jews are powerful. They control the media. They're all rich. I don't know what. And therefore, their issues need to be brought into the context of the actual oppressed people, Muslims, you know, who number many, many, many tens of millions more than Jews. It's a weird rot, and those chickens are coming home to roost now. And I think a lot of people on the left are thinking back about all the times that they yelled genocide and decolonize, and how what all they were doing was, you know, yelling out, speaking up, and raising awareness by using the most direct and confrontational language they can. And oops, turns out my friends really thought that.
Yeah. What's your feeling on, there was that piece that went viral yesterday, the day the delusions died by Constantine.
Yes.
Do you feel like this is it? Like, do you feel like this is some moment that people are going to be waking up, and will they now be like, well, I guess I'm voting for Trump, you know, that.
I mean, anecdotally speaking, I'm seeing a lot of disillusionment, feelings of isolation. I don't want to violate the trust of anybody that I did not consult with before speaking about this. So I'll say very generally that I've heard some very upsetting stories from people who all of a sudden feel like they need to reevaluate every serious relationship in their life, friends and college buddies and stuff like that. I think that the main effects of this are going to be more quiet and more slow moving. I think that the quiet disgust that a lot of people feel now, and isn't being expressed by loud posts on the internet or loud marches where people shout and yell, it'll come later. It'll come later when people in positions of power will find an opportunity to exert that power against people who behaved like that. You know, money, already many millions of dollars have dried up from certain colleges, Penn in particular, and Leslie Wexner, who is the founder of Victoria's Secret, or the owner of Victoria's Secret, also like withdrew money, I believe, from Harvard. The the damage is going to happen. And some of it will be hard to spot as the result of this. But I mean, just look at what happened with like Black Lives Matter and how they have substantially waned. This year during Black History Month, there was a whole discourse thing about how a lot of DEI people and people who usually have their busiest month of the year during Black History Month, speaking on colleges and doing events, they encountered like a wasteland and didn't get invited and didn't get asked. And it's no longer, remember after George Floyd, if you said something about Black Lives Matter, you were done.
Yeah.
If you didn't put a black picture on your Instagram feed, you would be criticized. That's no longer the case. And a lot of it has to do with the way the leaders of that organization acted, specifically Patrisse Cullors with all of the mansion and all of that stuff that happened. But you didn't see like protests against Black Lives Matter. You didn't see big movements and letters and stuff. It just happened kind of in the background. And all of a sudden they looked around, they're like, what? Nobody wants to invite us to a talk anymore? Why?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is going to happen. And I think I said this on Twitter yesterday because I posted a thread about how I think a lot of progressive and liberal Jews need to have a come to Moses moment. And a lot of people misconstrued that as moving rightward. Oh, because Constantine said a lot of Jews woke up liberals on October 7th and went to bed conservatives, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be some of that for sure. But what I think will be more of, and I think this is the thing I think Jews who feel isolated should do, is not change their ideology. It's stake territory within their ideology that is specifically against things like this. I was saying to somebody who said to me, I'm progressive. What am I supposed to do? I don't want to vote Republican. I'm progressive on abortion and financial issues and LGBT issues. And I said, I think what you should do, not you, him specifically, but you as the group, is to create a new power dynamic within progressivism.
Right.
Create groups that are distinctly Jewish and progressive and are not down with that stuff. Or not Jewish, but just generally groups that are not down with what has been going on. You shouldn't have to be afraid to say that you're Jewish just to advocate for like climate change, right? That is ridiculous, especially since you're talking about a large group, a socioeconomically sound group, people who have power and voice and money, and think that they gotta like hide who they are because otherwise there is no avenue for them to fight for causes they believe in.
Yeah.
And so if you create a kind of parallel structure of Jews who are against anti-Semitism or against on the left as kind of like a bulwark to that whole thing, you'll be able to actually exert power and you'll be able to pursue the policies you want without having to like tolerate this kind of behavior.
Yeah. I feel like people are still very shocked by some of the anti-Semitism they're seeing. And sadly, in this instance, I mean, it's still shocking. Like, people forget that there were groups when they're like, no, this isn't about anti-Semitism. Like 2 days. I don't even know if it was 2 days. It was in Australia, so it might have been a day. It was a day or two after the attacks, and people were saying "gas the Jews" in Australia. I wanted to believe that it wasn't real. You know, I was like, this can't be real. I had to reach out to my friends in Australia and have them confirm that actually happened, because I just was. This was not even, Israel was still reeling from what happened. They hadn't even considered what how they were going to respond. And this was already out in the open and blatant. And people were really surprised by this. Although I keep thinking of when there was, I forget when it was, but there was a lot of violence against Jews in LA and New York. It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with a family member, and he was like, oh, is that all the white supremacists? I was like, yeah. What? But truly, like, if you consume only liberal media, MSNBC, CNN, you only think it's white supremacists, not neo-Nazi types who are who are the anti-Semitic ones. Because it hasn't been covered at all. If you've been paying attention at all to what's going on in New York for years, you know that there's a rampant anti-Semitism in the Black community.
Yeah, there and a part of that, I mean, again, part of that, like you said, is people who are victims of the media filter that they experience life through. And as a result of that, it's exactly like the paragraph I just read to you, right? It immediately went to white supremacy. You got all kinds of SPLC type groups that keep hammering that that's the problem. And let's to be clear, it is a problem, right? The Tree of Life shooting was a white supremacist type shooting. There were other incidents that were white supremacy influenced.
Mm-hmm.
But and when I was talking about all of these rallies, now people immediately countered with pictures from the Tiki Torch March.
Right.
But it's important to remember that the Tiki Torch March was one thing, and that then they tried to do a Unite the Right 2, and 15 people showed up. There was 10 times more media than actual participants there.
It was 15 Nazis in a gazebo.
Right.
Yeah.
And so to compare that is like an exercise in sort of reality denial. And just you wait, especially if Trump's the nominee. We're going to be asked to care deeply about everyone doing an okay sign, and everybody, one person is going to be filmed at a Trump rally doing a Nazi salute, and then we're going to be expected to care and be mad and vote for someone else because of that stuff. Remember when the Republican convention had a stage that somebody decided was in the shape of an anti-Semitic Norse rune? Remember that?
Yeah.
I'm saying we're looking at tea leaves and seeing hate speech and just whistling past all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unbelievable, and it's motivated by many different things. And like I said, I think the disgust is slow moving. The Indian Ocean tsunami wasn't a tsunami like in the movies. It wasn't a giant 200-foot wave that washed across the beach. It was just the tide coming in and coming in and coming in and not stopping. And that is the kind of movement I think we're going to see over the next several years.
In terms of the anti-Semitism?
Well, I mean, more in terms of the movement away. The people are not going to embrace causes that were this open about this in the same way that they did in the past, I think. And I think we're going to see new players pop up on the scene of NGOs or activist groups that are not going to be people who said, "Oh, I became disillusioned with the Democrats and I'm now a Republican." No, it's going to be, I've become disillusioned with, the people in my own ideology, and therefore I'm going to be separate from them and advocate for progressive or libertarian causes or whatever, while still being openly critical of these other people who happen to coincide with me on one topic or a few topics, but not act like they're my allies. They see me as less than human.
Yeah. That there was the video going around this week of the people, I think it was in Manhattan or somewhere, and they were chanting the intifada.
Or there's only one solution.
There's only one solution. I was like, how the chance of one of those people, at least one, who have logged into Twitter and told me that I am carrying water for Nazis for the past 8 years is pretty high. The chance of one of the people in that rally, and it's what I don't understand is, do they know what they're saying, or is it do they think, again, are these educated people who haven't played the tape forward or really asked themselves what that actually means in reality?
I think there's a few things at play here. There is a lot of ignorance. I think that the poll that showed that a majority of 18 to 24-year-olds think the Hamas operation was justified actually is more indicative of ignorance than political opinion. Just looking at the wording of the question. Again, if you're a Zoomer who sees, like the pro-Palestine movement as the thing you got to be doing,
right?
You're just gonna. What do you know? Do you know what they're talking about specifically? The Hamas operation. Like
Free Palestine sounds so cool. It's like, oh, free Palestine.
And even if it doesn't sound cool to you, the problem with the way that online culture works now, it has this kind of extreme FOMO effect where you're like, oh, look, these people I like, they're saying this streamer I like, this creator I love, everybody I know, look at these tweets that are getting tens of thousands of views. And also look at who's on Israel's side. It's Trump and it's Mitch McConnell and it's, whatever, stuff like that. And so you're already so primed to just respond with like, well, yeah, of course I'm on this side. You don't know what you're talking about exactly. Then there's people who do know, but are sort of in the Kubler-Ross process of denial, because there's something very hard in discovering that a cause that you're very passionate about has an ugly side.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to believe that. And a lot of these people who got photographed tearing down hostage posters, when confronted, said stuff like, it's fake, it's not real, they only attacked the military. And a lot of that is self-delusion. A lot of that is, and it's something that we've been seeing on the right for a long time as well. My podcast co-host mentioned this, where a lot of right-wing influencers will say the deep state and somebody's got to do something about this deep state. And then somebody goes and shoots up an FBI office and they say, oh, it's definitely a psyop. It's definitely a false flag. And it's like, what are you talking about? You keep saying somebody do something. And then somebody does something and you're like, nah, that's not what our guys. Definitely not.
Right,
none of us would do a thing like that. I'm just going to sit in my studio in Maryland and say somebody's got to do something or we're all doomed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say decolonize Palestine. And then somebody goes and murders, 1,600 people. And some of the people around you are like, well, what'd you think it was? Vibes? And your only way to deal with it is to try and downplay what happened, to try to minimize it into an act that you can conceivably defend either like to others or to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very real cognitive dissonance occurring in real time. And with the Zoomers, so much of this, I was reading this whole thread last night about how TikTok is a lot of the people are getting their stuff from TikTok. It's very free Palestine and anti-capitalism, and the world is, colonial. And I was like, these people don't believe that Helen Keller was real.
Yeah.
There's a whole group of Zoomers that think that she's a fake made up character or wasn't even blind. And I'm supposed to be like, yeah, they know what's up. They're media literate.
It's the website that has to tell you not to boil your NyQuil because it might kill you if you eat it like that.
There was just something last week that was going around about how people were hitting themselves in the face with a hammer so that their bone structure could change.
Oh yeah, cheekbone. Yeah, the cheekbone thing.
The doctor in the article was like, "Do not hit yourself in the face with a hammer." I'm like, this is where these people are getting this information from, and they're like, this is where the Tide Pod challenge came from.
Yeah. We love to laugh about how microwaves say don't dry your baby in the microwave or whatever. But these are exactly the kind of people who would do that if TikTok was like life hack on how to dry your baby after a bathtub.
Yeah.
Put it on, nuke him on low for 30 seconds.
Yeah. It's so weird. And then seeing like there's so many moving parts around this. There's the watching people who are anti-Semites on the right suddenly be like, I'm just pro-Palestine. I'm just, what's the kind of latching onto this because they know that they can run cover for their own anti-Semitism. And suddenly you see like the horseshoe fully connects with the it's the meme of like we hate the Jews.
Yeah. The shaking
hands.
You touched on something important, which is that it has to do with how people refer to their own comments on this topic, right? If you get fired or canceled or whatever for saying something about gender, you'll often see the person say, I got fired because I said there were two genders, right? If somebody gets in trouble for saying something about this conflict, they'll always say, oh, I got in trouble for advocating for the lives of Palestinians. You never hear them repeat what it was that they said, what it was that they shared, right? You always hear this kind of vague, oh, look, I'm getting, yeah, what did you do? Oh, I tore down some posters and laughed at dead children. That, you know what I mean? Like once the thing is described, and that's in this topic, I see that more than in any other place. It's always some extremely vague and extremely self-friendly description of what it was you were doing. Just say what you did. If it's as self-evidently not a big thing, let me decide.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
What do you think about the lists and the college kids being who signed on to these letters, or in some cases didn't even sign on and just had their names put on because they were in a club? Or wasn't there someone yesterday or this week that was going around who was fired from a science magazine I'd never heard of or something like that for I didn't see the whole story.
Retweeting the Onion article.
Yeah.
So that guy, retweeted an Onion article and also said some stuff about it, none of which to me seemed fireable. I think the Onion has been especially terrible about this. And just in an unfunny way. To me, that's the bigger sin. Because they do post extremely kind of unapologetic articles about horrific stuff, which is fine. I come from the edgy comedy world. Like, I get it. But a lot of it is you can tell the spirit behind it is nastiness and not humor, because there is no humorous crutch. Like one of them was something like the Israeli official account tweeted pictures of dead children and wrote, "I'm so horny for this," or something like that.
Right.
And it's like, oh, you're not even trying to make some kind of point, right? There's lots of anti-Israel stuff the Onion posts that at least has like a comedy angle to it. It's making some kind of allegory. It's making fun of something. It isn't just going like, haha, they're posting lots of pictures of dead kids. You know why they're doing that? Because they're the only people who somehow have to prove they got to parade around their dead. They got to bring reporters into a room and show them footage for 45 seconds that had 45 minutes that had them crying and retching and gasping just because some people are like, yeah, I don't believe it.
Yeah. A lot of people.
Yeah, could you imagine France after the Bataclan massacre being like, here, look at all these bullet holes, look at all these, so that you believe that it actually happened. Like, where do you see stuff like this? Where do you see they really like?
They live streamed it. Hamas live streamed this shit, and people don't believe it. That's what's crazy to me. It wasn't like they were trying to hide it; they were very proud of it.
And not just proud, because in the footage they showed reporters, one of the pieces of footage that got the most attention was where a terrorist called his mother from the phone of the girl that he had murdered and bragged about having killed 10 Jews. He says, check your WhatsApp, I killed 10 Jews. And she says, I'm proud of you, or something like that. Like you said, it's the idea that this was some kind of like clandestine thing that there's no info about. Nobody knows anything about that. That's the stuff. Like you have, as you said, the GoPro footage, lots and lots of it, and people are like, Meanwhile, Hamas writes on a piece of paper, 70 gazillion kids died in Gaza, and people just run with that.
I know, that's the other weird thing is like that's been very strange to observe, is like they're like everybody, I keep seeing like the 5,000 people died and I'm like, so you demand to see like video proof of rapes and pictures of exactly the number of dead babies that have been reported, and you can just be like, and 7,000 people died today. and that's nobody's trying to fact check this? Or
you want to talk about disproportionality in this conflict? The disproportionality is that you or me or whatever, Israel, you need to bring like footage of a beheaded baby from 3 angles with a CSI analysis of the wound marks on its neck, so you could tell me if it was beheaded with a knife or an RPG, in order to disprove your version of events that has no evidence to support it. That's not how it works.
And even then, it won't matter. There are people who will be like, signing in to be a forensic analysis, me, a dumb idiot YouTuber.
Yeah, and you don't get to sit there like you're fucking Caesar and have a piece of evidence brought to you and go, next, give me the next video, give me the next interview. Fake. Oh, this is exaggerated. Oh, I can't confirm this. And I'm like, okay, what confirms your version of events? And the response basically boils down to, I hate my parents. I'm rebelling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a lot of dead babies. You know, the dead baby Twitter is I'm very talking about things that are slow moving or we won't really see the effects of. I'm wondering how this is affecting everyone, you know, just everyone's psyche. And there was a week where it felt like people were having like a dead baby off, you know, it's like the oh no, we have dead babies too. And I think most people can agree dead babies are bad, like they're horrific. And it just that whole aspect has been really, from like a psychological perspective, I'm like, what is this doing to people? Is it making them more desensitized? Is it making them turn away? I know a lot of people who've just straight up left Twitter probably forever. What is your feeling about that?
It's
and then you have Syrian dead babies because they're, you know, the picture, it's like,
and that's age old. You know, at some point I kind of cleared my pre-2015 tweets. I kind of like deleted everything prior to 2015. And if I hadn't, you would have seen me say these exact same things back in 2010 as well.
Yeah.
I have a somewhat unique perspective on this as someone who worked in terrorism research during the height of ISIS and worked a lot on their media propaganda efforts. And I've probably seen every beheading video, every photo of mutilation from that period. And that was not an easy thing to experience. And that did not prepare me for this. It didn't prepare me for the upset. And again, the fact that you got to post it because somebody just flat out refuses to believe it. The thing I will never forgive is, aside from obviously the massacre, but I'm saying not Hamas. I'm saying the people on here, on the internet and in academia and stuff. The thing I'm never going to forgive them for is forcing us to do that, to immerse ourselves in gore and horror, just because the alternative is for them to claim that it didn't happen.
Yeah. And then even when you do post it, it's like, oh, this is AI generated. That whole aspect of things has been, and I've talked a lot, and I was writing this week about just the weird trying to balance like not turning away, because I feel like you should witness this. You know, I don't want to turn away. People are living this reality. They saw their family members murdered. They have experienced insane amounts of trauma, and I'm like, I can't look. But also there is like an icky rubbernecking feeling to it too. And there's also a weird thing that happens like on the internet. It's not like when you go to a Holocaust museum or you go somewhere where these things happened and you feel the weight of the place and you're in person and you see shoes and luggage and all of the tangible things, you are online and the next post will be like about baseball. Like it's fucking doing something weird to my brain where
Yeah.
I'm, my husband was playing whatever that video game is that you guys are all playing.
Baldur's Gate.
Yeah. He was playing Baldur's Gate last night with his buddy and came to bed and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, my nightly routine of like reading horrific atrocities and binge eating Skittles.
Yeah.
And then trying to go to sleep. But I don't think I'm alone. It seems like a lot of people are not doing well.
Thank God that I have a girlfriend that keeps me sane, and friends who will offer to pull me away from it for a few hours. That's why I said that my urge to say "I told you so" to somebody who says I realize I didn't know any of my friends for real is that I'm trying to imagine myself in a situation where I didn't have any kind of good support structure from what I'm going right now. And it would be the most awful thing ever. And so my desire isn't to say to someone like that, "Ha, you picked your friends. Now look where you are."
Yeah.
Right. My only stipulation was that the thing I don't want to see is I don't want to see an attempt to sit this out, to wait this out, to say, well, eventually people are going to move on and I'm not going to have to hear anymore about how I'm less than a person. And maybe I can pretend that this didn't exist and go back to fighting about trans rights or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you straight up. A lot of people out there, me included, are not going to let people forget. We're not going to let people forget what some people said, how some people acted. And that's another, I think, slow-moving consequence of this. If you think counter canceling was a big thing before, just wait. Every minor stupid cancel culture controversy that you're going to see in the next 2 years is going to be started by someone who has a paraglider tweet or the massacre was fake tweets. It's going to happen. It's going to happen a lot. And hopefully the fact that it's going to happen is going to kind of depress that urge with people, or at least increase people's, level of not giving a shit about stuff like this. There was even a thing going on right now. I don't know if you saw about the Australian sushi place in New York.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
An Australian woman wanted to open a sushi place in New York. Some chef decided that that was, racist, got her to delete her socials and got her review bombed on Yelp or something like that. And then a couple of different things happened. One, a few people kind of got together to upvote her back, which they did. And they discovered that this guy who's mad about the Australian sushi place is opening a Puerto Rican izakaya, like a Japanese Puerto Rican bar. And he got community noted about it. And the phenomenon of we're done with the stuff, especially when we saw what people like you said about this butchery. If you think we're going to let you drum up some controversy about somebody's Halloween costume, I got news for you.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen anymore.
To go back to the kind of college thing, what are your thoughts on that? On the people who are signing these letters and are now losing jobs and whatever?
So the letter signing is, I think, a slightly different topic than, people tearing down posters or people posting directly on social media about
their personal views.
Haha, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
It represents a slightly larger problem. I think the major problem in the student organization letter thing is the existence of student organization letters to begin with. I think that it is a very convenient way for people to say shit without having to put their name on it. They can hide behind the name of some student organization. It lends their statement more legitimacy, because who cares if Johnny whatever said a thing? If it's the Harvard Students Association for whatever, that's a thing. And they also say it's an organization that includes this many hundreds of students or something like that. Okay, if you're worried about that, then like you said, don't sign it. Don't join the student organization, or maybe make a statement about how you weren't on board with this and you didn't vote for it. You weren't asked your opinion on it, which did happen. Some organizations pulled out of the letter, stuff like that. There are people who are getting tagged in the speech debate about this unfairly. Always happens. But the idea that, like I said, posting like not arguably, but directly, like, joy about this death. Oh, we're coming for you, the rest of the Zionists, with blood drop emoji and stuff like that. Those things are very, very different. And the idea that, I think a lot of people who are sort of in the cancel culture, free speech sphere debate are very focused right now on being more consistent than the other side, than agreeing that everybody has a line.
Yeah.
Even the people who are opposed to all of these firings, they have a line. If you say to your boss, I'm going to kill you, or if you say to your boss, you're a dickhead and your wife is ugly, I don't think that any of these people, even Harper's letter people, would think that you getting fired is some kind of outrage.
Yeah.
Okay? And now all that means is they have a line. They have a line. I have a line. Why is their line more valid than mine? It isn't, in my opinion. And I also think that I draw my line pretty far to the extreme, right? I don't think that I was even saying, contrary to what people around me believe, that I don't think from the river to the sea saying that is something that should get you fired. And the reason for that is that the horror of that statement is the implications of it, not the statement itself. Yay, murder, and from the river to the sea, that can arguably be said to be advocating for murder, are not the same thing. You can say, I don't think they should kill Israelis. I think that people who have been here for 2 generations should have to leave, or something like that, right? Whatever. Argue whatever you want about the implications of that, but there is a difference between that and a direct statement, ha ha, you're dead, or alternatively, you're lying, nobody died.
Right.
Those are very different things, and I think it's a fairly easily definable line. It's not some kind of arbitrary, whoops, you broke the rules. I do think that directly advocating or celebrating a mass murder is a perfectly fine thing to get fired for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the weird thing. I mean, you see it with people who are banned from the sites, like they'll get outraged, and I'm like, well, you were like openly harassing people, and it's weird. Like, if I behaved that way in real life or at work, I would be fired. If I was just like telling people that it's just, there's so much to this. Even like you were saying something that I've been saying about the monetization now on Twitter, X Twitter, or whatever, and how I see these people kind of farming off the hate and off the whatever whatever it is that they're using to kind of generate all of their tweets. And I don't know how you combat that. You shouldn't be able to make money off like war porn. That seems like a bad incentive.
Yeah, there's a problem. And again, when I spoke about the troubles of monetization here and what could be done about it, I was immediately accused of advocating for censorship, even though I very specifically was not talking about removing anybody's tweets. Again, I like my enemies out in the sunlight, where I can clearly see who they are where they stand.
It's been revealing.
Yeah. And but there is currently an incentive structure, because of how monetization was implemented, that actually promotes the idea of running with a big thing that's going to get a lot of attention, because there are no downsides for it being wrong. And that extends from the Jackson Hinkles of Twitter all the way to the New York Times.
Right.
If you saw Megan McArdle of the Washington Post was saying that people shouldn't blame bias for the fact that the New York Times ran with the Israel bombed the hospital story, and that it's more the fault of how SEO optimization works and how you're supposed to word your headlines and your subheadlines and stuff. And I said, look, Okay. But if you're an industry that makes ethics and morality and speaking truth your brand, that's just about as bad an offense to say, oh, I'm not biased, I'm just greedy. That's not exactly a defense of your behavior.
And it's very hard right now to tell people to, I'll see people, how do you even fight disinformation? How do you tell people where to go learn media literacy if you can't even trust representatives of Congress, the papers of record? Everybody ran with this, and that for a lot of people is kind of the final thing in their head, and then they move on if it's not openly corrected, which it usually isn't.
Yeah.
I don't know
when Brandy Zardosny does a whole crybaby fest about how, oh, we can't believe anything and all these blue checks on Twitter, like you just said, members of Congress, the biggest media outlets in the world, that then, slowly, they just retract their thing later and nobody says anything. There's, Hamas released a couple of elderly hostages last night. And one of them was interviewed, and Sky News, the British channel, cut up her response into two. Part one that got hundreds of thousands of views was her saying that they were nice to her. Part two was the part where she said they beat her, right? And
don't they know too that these people all have family members still being held hostage?
You know what? I've been saying this forever. I said this when we released a bunch of people from North Korea years ago. I said, never, ever take a newly released hostages statement at face value. Not ever. Because they're always going to say, oh, I'm very thankful to the North Korean government, and I'm very, yes, I was treated well. What are you doing? Like, do you not understand what's going on here?
Yeah.
It's like you want that soundbite. You want that media clip so you can post it in somebody's replies. Again, I'm going to say this over and over again. If global thermonuclear war started and the missiles were on their way here, instead of running to the bomb shelter, people are going to run to Twitter to be like, see, I told you, warmongers, as the mushroom clouds are erupting outside the window. It's that important. It's that important to people that
to be right,
nothing else matters.
Yeah, that I've seen a lot of that. A lot of this is something weird too that I saw yesterday about, like, the tech bros are all worried that this is going to cause World War III, and there's this like isolationist America first kind of faction of libertarians who are very anti-intervention and weirdly end up sounding and siding with a lot of the pro-Palestinians. They just have different reason. Like the Free Palestine, this is a colonial set. They just have different reasons for not wanting, for being. I'm not sure. How do you feel about that wing of things?
I think that a lot of it just has to do with, I don't want to have to talk about this or think about this. That's the same thing with Russia, Ukraine. And yeah, it also gets into the idea of, if you think this is something I understand, an aspect of it I understand is, if you think things are shit at home, right? And the economy is bad and there's a lot of homelessness and veterans aren't getting their medical care, you don't want to hear about $100 billion going to some other country fighting a war. I understand that, but I'm getting more of a sense that it's just, I don't care about this, and I don't want to have to care about this. And the less we are involved in it, the less I have to care about it. Let them kill themselves over there. It's not my problem. I didn't establish Israel. I didn't oppress the Palestinians, or I don't know what. That's not, why do I have to worry about this? I'm worried about what my kid is being taught at school, and I care about, I don't know what. It's stuff like that. But what you do in pursuit of that is the important part. I think it's perfectly fine for somebody who lives here to not care about this as much as I do.
Yeah.
It's understandable. Things happen. If a big thing happens in Nigeria, if some, big terrorist attack happened in Nigeria, I guarantee I would probably care less about it than a Nigerian American. And that's not that's not the world being broken. You know, things that are closer to you are going to affect you more. And that's a reality of life. But like I said, it comes from this sense of like, I don't want to talk about this because I don't give a shit. And so it's bad. And we shouldn't give them money and we shouldn't help them because any of that means I got to care about it now. And I don't want to.
When the other thing I'm seeing that I do understand is people who are comparing a lot of the rhetoric to the post 9/11 kind of escalation and reasons for getting us into the war. And this is the other kind of faction that I've been observing is the people. Well, then there's the people comparing it to COVID and WEF and those lockdowns and like, I mean, maybe I don't know. It really is like Jews are the scapegoat for humanity. And this moment has revealed it more than anything to me because every single person seems to have like a weird conspiracy theory around this and they're making it about them in some weird ways. And they'll take this thing that's been going on for thousands of years and extrapolate it. And suddenly it's about like how the powers that be want to wear a mask. But what are your opinions on people who are kind of saying that this is escalating rhetoric to get us into another Middle East conflict?
I think that the people who say things like this often don't really understand the specific circumstances. You know, like a big thing that a lot of people snarkily said when this thing first started, including like The Onion, but other people too, was like, oh, wow, look, a really convenient time for Netanyahu for all this to happen, either as a joke or as an implication that this is somehow precipitated
like
by
an inside
Israel.
job. Yeah.
As a, well, not even in that way, but like almost like provoked.
Right.
Or in some very extreme cases, like deliberately responded slowly so that it would be like a bigger deal. And that is, like you said, a flattened Western understanding, because in the past, conflicts with Gaza ended up reflecting well on Netanyahu in times of like political difficulty, because there is a kind of rally around the flag effect. This isn't that, though. This isn't that at all. The last thing that he or anyone in leadership in Israel wanted was something like this. The earthquake that's going on right now there is hard to describe and explain. And the dust from that really hasn't settled yet because the thing's still going on. But the idea that this was somehow engineered for like or either engineered or allowed to happen because of the political benefits involved is absolutely insane, and really just doesn't consider any of the realities of what's going on right now, like in Israel, the things that people are saying right now, the things that people are saying about what's going to happen on the day after. And the same thing happens here too. I think that both the people who like Biden and the people who hate him overestimate how dedicated he is to foreign policy issues like Ukraine and also Israel. He does enough so that nominally his like Democratic base and like normie liberals in this country like it and think that it's good. But he has been dragging his feet in Ukraine the whole time. Oh, we're not going to give them this weapon system. We're not going to give them. Okay, we're going to give it to them. Meanwhile, they could have used it all that time to do something meaningful and couldn't. Here, he's already the dialogue and the focus has moved primarily to what do we do with the Palestinians? All a humanitarian aid and stop your ground assault. Meanwhile, Muslim Americans are like, I'm never voting for Biden again. He hasn't said anything about the Palestinians. Okay, but he's been doing things for the Palestinians, putting pressure on Israel in a way that makes Israelis furious. You're sending more aid in? You're delaying the ground assault? We still have hostages? What's going on here? You're responding to this like a normal round of like rockets from Gaza. And so it is this, the wrongness of it. If you just go out and look at stuff beyond the one sentence Twitter description of like Biden stands with Israel or something like that, right? Go look at what he's doing, what his people are doing and saying. and what the people who want him to be rah-rah Israel think of his position. They don't think it's strong enough. They don't think it's aggressive enough. They think it's interfering with what Israel needs to do too much. But that doesn't matter. All that matters is they want a war. Everybody wants a war. I don't know why the tech bros think anybody in the world right now, or like world leader, wants a big conflict. What, because Raytheon? I mean, come on, man. Not to mention, I said to you Raytheon, because we're talking about kids in colleges and stuff. Everybody on the board of Raytheon was at Woodstock, dropping acid and dancing with a flower crown. So don't think that there is no hope for the current generation of dirty hippies to become the establishment themselves.
I mean, that's why I think I give a lot more leeway to like the college kids. I'm like, that is like peak libtard age. That is just when your peers you're at your most kind of idealistic, and you think that you can change the world, and you maybe you can in some ways, and then you kind of grow out of it.
Yeah,
it's like that.
I mean, I certainly hope so, and I certainly hope that a lot of people will have a moment of clarity where they look back at their behavior and think, yikes, right? And I mean, I hope that's what happens. I sincerely hope that out of this will grow a better understanding. There's, we always say complacency, right? We are all children of what they call the long peace, right? The relative period of global stability after World War II, right? There were wars, but there were no major sort of conflicts between major powers. And the kind of complacency of being a child of that period is what you see now, right? The world is so peaceful that people can be this disgusting about it. But we're entering a new era. We're entering a new era for Israelis and also for Jews around the world to have experienced and lived through the kind of story that they hear about the Jewish past. Every Jew has been raised on the notion that, like, never again, and all of these persecutions of the past, and it's not a thing of the past. It's a thing of the present, and probably the future, unless we do more.
Is this, when you say kind of people don't want to care, why should they care if they're kind of Americans just worrying about their bills and their mortgage and their kids?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of Americans involved in this. There's 30 dead Americans. There's 10 American hostages. But I'll leave that aside. There is the interconnectedness of geopolitics is something that isolationists want to argue doesn't exist. But just look at the things that are being said here about that. It's the same rhetoric, right? Settler colonialism, white colonialism. What do you think a land acknowledgement is?
Yeah.
But you think it's just about being happy and singing Kumbaya or whatever? You're saying, I'm standing on stolen land, and the implication from that is I got to give it back, or if they take it back, it's their right to take it back.
Mm-hmm.
And who am I to judge how they're going to take it back? What about what we did to the Native Americans? What, are you surprised if one of them goes and kills every white person in, I don't know, New Hampshire or Vermont and decides to take it over? It's the implications are the same. I've seen people on Twitter talk to American leftists and say, wait, what about, so the same applies to here, settler colonialism? And the answer is typically, yeah. What do you think? Where I'm going to skip here in our violent revolution? What do you think? The new world is just going to like skip over the United States? It's, a lot of sort of red pill kind of grifter people are already on that train of like, this is Black Lives Matter. This is trans rights. It's all the same. And that's not accurate. It would be more accurate to say that the kind of the acceptance of the kind of behavior to free yourself from the yoke of settler colonialism, the support for actions like that, there is no reason for us to think that similar support won't extend to actions here. It just doesn't. Why? Why, like, what makes this place different than there?
Yeah. Oh, I know you have to go. I could talk to you all day about this, and I'm so grateful for your time, and I'm just my heart is with you all the time, and
Thank you.
I'm
Yes,
glad
would
you.
that it be under better circumstances, right?
Well, we asked the same two questions, and I'll ask them again. What's your biggest defect of character right now?
Probably right at this moment in time, probably my sort of inability to disconnect, to keep looking and to keep arguing, and sometimes to the detriment of my health. I just hope that I'm getting across to at least somebody.
And what's your biggest asset?
Again, I'll say it in the through the prism of what's going on right now. I think that I am still able to resist, the worst urges, because sometimes you just want to yell the same thing at the other person, right?
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the fact that you actually feel like that. But when somebody says the most vile thing to you, sometimes you just want to come back with something equally as vile. Yeah, all of you should die. Not all of us should die. But that's not how I feel. And despite that sort of that rage and that pain that wants that outlet, I think I'm controlling my worst urges, and I'm still trying to deal. I do curse a lot. I've always been a potty mouth, but I'm not succumbing to inflation rhetoric right now, right? Because this highlights the danger of using words like that, because you don't know if the people around you are also just using them because they're mad or because they're cold and calculatingly supportive of it.
Yeah. Well, where can we find you and all of your thinkings?
Thank you. You can find me on Twitter at Neon Taster, and also my podcast, which is called Ambitious Crossover Attempt. You get it on iTunes and Spotify and all those places. We've been spending the past 2 weeks talking about this war a lot as well. And that's about it.
Thank you so much. It was good to see you.
Yeah, you too, Bridget. Thank you very much.
It's time for the weekly check-in with Bridget and cousin Maggie. I love how the minute Jaron and I did the factory settings a little bit about getting the fuckets in this time of year, I was like, I'm going to be off the beam any minute now. And sure enough, I was. It's funny, like, what off the beam looks like, though, when you're sober. Yeah. But it is, we were joking on factory settings today when we recorded it, because we did it about discipline, which we've kind of alluded to, but we've never really directly talked about what that looked like when we were growing up, or what even the like messaging was around that topic. And then we started talking about just like what a shit show we've been, and how, if anything, it makes us realize like we can never relapse together, because even just the way we are around sweets and candy is so addictive.
Yeah, you'd both be like dead in 2 weeks.
Yeah, when we're good, we're really good for each other, but it's also like when we're bad, we can enable each other in like sneaky ways. And he's like, I knew you would eat that bag. He got a fucking bag of Halloween candy.
Oh, Lord.
Like
a
2
weeks
ago.
before
I was
Halloween.
like, why did you do this? And he's like, because sometimes you say you want something sweet. I'm like, not a giant bag of Halloween candy. And he's like, I knew when I bought it, it would be gone before Halloween. I'm like, why did you freaking buy it if you knew that? And so I've been like binging The Wire, because I haven't been able to sleep, because I have no guardrails around my social media at all right now. And I've let myself just fully succumb to this news event that's like late at night, right before I go to bed. I'll be reading all these atrocities and horror stories, and then in order to like get that out of my head, I haven't been able to sleep, so I've been sleeping on the couch.
You're watching The Wire to get the atrocities out of your head.
The Wire is quaint but compared to this shit, it's like I'll take some domestic infighting over this any day of the week. So yeah, I've just been, I don't know why, The Wire just has been my kind of thing normally I go to like Arrested Development, but I've seen that so many times. But then I'll be like, I'm not going to have candy. I'm not going to have candy. And then I'll just binge eat a bunch of candy and feel so much shame afterwards when I see like the worst thing about Halloween candy is how many wrappers are left when you binge eat it. It is so shameful. It's like, it's bad enough that you're binge eating it, but then there's like 20, if you have like Starburst and you eat like 2 or 3 of the little packages, it's like the 3 packages and then each individual Starburst. It's so many wrap. Last night I was like, and then they make all this noise. I was like, oh God, I hope Jaron doesn't hear me cleaning up all my wrappers out here. And just eating like popcorn. I just don't do that. I usually can stop myself, but it is weird how when I really am so extreme in that way. It's like when I let my guard down in one area, the freaking whole castle falls.
The floodgates open in all the others. Yeah.
I do feel like a puppet of the algorithm.
Just the algorithm's little meat puppet.
I feel like I was trying to write about it. I'm like, it's like I've lost control of like air traffic control. It's like it's been taken over by terrorists, literally. Literally. That's the point of what they do too, of like live streaming this shit. It's to terrorize the entire population.
Yeah.
And now
they have a captive
you can do
audience.
it of the world.
Yeah.
It's nuts. Yeah. So it's not been great. The child was threatening to like throw my phone the other day, and I was like, please throw it in the ocean. Like, throw it in the fucking toilet. I don't even care. This time of year, man, it's tough. I just feel completely disembodied. And then I'm not working out, and I don't food prep, and it's like the little things. It's really just systems. I just let one system fall, and then the
rest,
dominoes all just fall down.
I know. It's been weird.
I mean, there's like a very heavy
vibe. I don't know.
It does feel like some ancient hatred was given permission to be unleashed.
Right, to rise again.
Yeah. It's got to be so weird being Jewish.
I know.
And I saw somebody tweeting today, and they were like, I always thought it was just like memories at this, I guess, like the Passover prayer. It's like she said, I always thought it was like in memory, but it's really like, no, every Jew, like every generation has to deal with being annihilated if you're Jewish. Like, I thought it was just like in the past.
That's mind-boggling.
It's so ancient.
Yeah.
That's the thing. When there's so much talk about this, and what I feel like in terms of like the context that seems to get stripped from it is like, 75 years ago when they created Israel. I'm like, this shit with why do people hate the Jews so much? And why is it okay for it's like things that would not be excusable with any other race or population or religious people on the entire planet are somehow okay, or they're justified, or they're expected to behave differently. It's wild. It is wild.
Yeah.
It's wild to witness it. And
happening in the world in 2023.
Yeah, and it's like, I totally understand how people thought they were the good guys. Like, they thought Arnold Schwarzenegger did like this really beautiful thing that he was talking about anti-Semitism, and Jaron heard me listening to it and only heard the beginning, and he's like, wasn't his dad like a guard? I'm like, yeah, he was, but and then he gets into it. He's like, I saw how broken these people were because they chose hate, and if you choose the side of hate, it's never good. And I think a lot of people they're using the Israel-Palestine thing as cover for their anti-Semitism. And then you see like there was all this stuff coming out of Georgia today that was like the right wing's kind of glomming, and it is, I'm like, you, no matter what your thoughts are, like these are the people that you're siding with. They're like the person in your march has a like keep the world clean sign that was going around yesterday.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Like this is the, and I don't think it's fair to call anyone who criticizes the way Israel behaves anti-Semitic.
Right.
That, and I understand like the pushback.
It's the same thing as calling everyone a transphobe who's like, can we have a nuanced conversation about this?
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people in good faith who are trying to have nuanced conversations and who are not even necessarily like pro-Palestine. This is colonial. They're more anti-American intervention. We shouldn't be involved in this, and seeing a lot of parallels in the post 9/11 rhetoric to the post October 7th rhetoric, which like I can understand that perspective. I was one of those people who was like, there aren't WMDs, and there weren't. And everybody was like, you're a crazy anti-American if you even suggested that. And then you see like the kind of power that gets grabbed under that guise. So I understand people who are kind of like, we should pause, but also like, okay, but you should still be demanding for the release. Like, what are they supposed to do? It's so weird. It's so fucking weird. People will be like, we need to demand a ceasefire. Like, okay, well, tell Hamas to stop firing rockets too. Why is it only them?
Right. And I was reading, when I was going through your Twitter looking for stuff to pull for dumpster fire, someone was like, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Like, they're not like a government that you want to be negotiating a ceasefire with. Like, I don't know.
Right.
They're in power, but they're not a legitimate government. So how do you negotiate a ceasefire with them?
Yeah, because you're literally negotiating with terrorists.
Right.
But they're also the government.
Right.
Yeah.
And who would just want to annihilate you. Like, how do you negotiate a ceasefire with that?
And that's the thing. This was not about like when the more that you see the videos and hear about the videos that Hamas has released, this was not about the politics of Israel. This was about killing the Jews.
Right.
They were happy to do all these atrocious, horrific things and send videos of it back to their family who were like, may God be with you. And we're told like this was basically a suicide mission, not like, oh, you're going to liberate Gaza from Israel. This was like, you're going to go liberate everyone from the Jews. This is their worldview. Like, I just don't think the Western mind can comprehend that worldview.
Right.
It is so fundamentally different. It was the thing that when I was in Egypt and in that part of the world, and even Sri Lanka and India, you're like, oh, this is like a fundamentally different worldview, the way they view Jews, the way they view women. It is baked in. Talk about fucking factory settings.
Yeah.
And to try and evaluate that from like the Western mind, it always seems so simple and hilarious to me. Because I'll see, it's like people who are Jewish and they're pro-Palestine, and I get it. Again, it's sympathetic. I can see it from the kind of like geopolitical, America shouldn't be involved and whatever, but it also seems like weirdly self-loathing, and the West is so self-loathing. Like what is that? It's just like we're just the people on top right now.
Yeah.
But the history over there is so crazy. It's like it's been conquered, and I mean it's really makes me feel small and stupid. Like the whole Israel-Palestine thing has always made me feel humbled by how little I actually know. But I don't even know. It's just crazy watching people put out these tweets where they'll be like, oh, I'm a humanitarian, but then they'll post something where it's like, this is how much of America has been taken over by Israel. It's like, you are an anti-Semite. For all of the talk about internalized misogyny and internalized whiteness and like all of this stuff, no, I feel like internalized anti-Semitism really got skipped over in that.
Yeah.
that conversation.
Yeah.
And Carol Markowitz was making a good point today. She was like, Jews are whatever you don't want them to be. So right now they're white passing and they're not brown enough. But before they weren't seen as white, when they were, even though they were white, it was like
it's bizarre.
It is fucking wild to like
how much gets turned against them. And it's just like, all of a sudden it's like, well, blame the Jews. You're like, what? What?
They really are like
they're like the scapegoats for everything.
Humanity, for fucking humanity. It really is. And they're always in this position where they're like not supposed to defend themselves.
It's weird.
Because even in defending, it reminds me so much of when I was in Czech Republic. And that's the other weird thing is to see Americans, like, I don't care. Comment on whatever you want to comment on. But if you've never left America, could you ever consider that some other people who have different perspectives on this, who don't, like, I just think of going to Prague and having our Jewish guide taking us to the former ghettos. And he was saying they were isolated and put in the ghetto. Mm-hmm. And when the Black Plague came through, they blamed it on the Jews because they didn't have it, because they had to have better sanitation because they were in the ghetto. And so they had to make sure they got rid of all of their
like waste.
They just had better waste management because they had to. They were forced to by the sake of being ghettoized. And
then they
blamed the plague on them. Yeah. Like his story was crazy. He spoke like 13 languages. God. And he learned Russian history when he grew up. And then was like in the 90s. I mean, the last Russian tanks rolled out of there in like the 90s.
Wow.
And then had to relearn history because it wasn't what they had been taught.
It's wild.
I mean, talk about like learning that history belongs to the victors in real time. And then you have to relearn history. Yeah. And I do think I have like, you know, then somebody, like my DMs have just been... Sometimes I wish people could see things from my perspective, because when someone's interacting with you, it's like they feel like you're the only person that's coming at them, or that it's like, do you guys know how many fucking emails and DMs and shit I get all across social media? It is insane, not to mention text messages.
Yeah.
And it is an insane amount of stuff is coming at you all the time. And even to be able to like filter through that and scroll through it. And I have people yelling at me and saying, I don't care enough. Like I only care more about Jewish kids than Palestinian kids. And then I'm like, do I? You know, I'm the kind of person that's always trying to check myself. And I'm like, do I care more about Jewish kids than Palestinian kids? And I don't think that's true. No. I hate like all kids.
You don't
dying.
Want any kids to die.
I hate even being put in that position to like that seems like a fucked up kind of question, you know, position. But it's
just astonishing to me the amount of time people can spend pointing their fingers at each other, being like, you don't think right.
I have, you know, hundreds of people every day telling me I don't think right.
It's weird.
The other weird thing about parasocial relationships too that I've noticed from people who because this moment has like broken something, even in people who got along or whatever, like people are now everybody's lining up on pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, and even if you're anti-interventionist, you're therefore pro-Palestine. It just seems like it's broken the discourse down even more. But it's a weird thing, too, where somebody you'll be kind of like friends with and thought you'd been talking with for years. And like you have what you think is a reasonable relationship. And then they'll be like, oh, you said this thing I don't agree with. And now I've lost all respect for you. You're like, that's not how fucking friendships work.
Know.
Like, it's weird. It's fucking weird. But then I'm like, oh, this is a parasocial relationship. Right. This is what this is. Like, I think they're my friend, and they're like, oh, you're my friend as long as you say things that I agree with.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
That's like I'm not the crazy one here.
I've read like some comments like that where it's just like, oh, I disagree with you, and now I'm no longer a supporter of yours. And it's just like,
Which is fine. They can take their money and do whatever they want.
Yeah.
Like, I don't give a shit about that.
It's not even someone who was giving you money. It's just like someone who, maybe subscribed on YouTube. And it's like, okay, so you only follow people who you agree with. And God forbid somebody say something you disagree with. And then if you do disagree with them, you lose all respect for them as a human at all. Like with no understanding of, the rest of what they might stand for.
No conception that like other people think differently than you and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. People will say things. They'll get mad at me for being self-deprecating and saying I'm a moron too. Mm-hmm. Or they'll like call me out and be like, that's, you're thoughtful and intelligent. I'm like, yeah, but I know I'm a moron. Like if I know anything, I know I'm a moron. I know there's like two people that I think probably have a reasonable grasp of the historical position and all of the geopolitics involved in this situation.
Yeah.
That are looking at it with an understanding of the region, who are Jewish, who have been there, or who are Palestinian. I like when all of this happened, I reached out to my Palestinian friend too, because I know this is hard for I have friends from all of those places, and I know that it's got to be tough, but and then how do you put your emotions aside I really take it for a grain of salt from like someone like me, where I'm like, I've never been there.
Right.
So I already know that I'm missing like an enormous amount of context. And even when you've gotten to a place, you only realize like how much even more little you know.
How little you know.
Yeah.
I think there is like, obviously you're very smart and very thoughtful, but I think there's nothing wrong with being like, I'm a moron, because it keeps you humble in that way of like,
a moron.
No, but we're all morons, all of us. And I think you're freaking dumpster fire. Step one, admit that you're a moron and you don't know as much as you think you do, should be applied to all humans everywhere at all times, because we all think we know more than we do. We all have opinions formed on like loosely understood facts and things that might be incorrect and just emotional, irrational things. Like we all think we know more than we do.
And then even if you form things on facts only, which is good, you should start with reason. At the same time, can't be a robot who doesn't have empathy for people being emotional.
Yeah.
Because they're also human. It's just like, it's a shit show. It's weird because there was this piece that Konstantin Kisin wrote that was going viral today, the day the delusions died. And it's like, but did they die?
Right.
I mean,
or are we more delusional than ever?
Did they die? Or are these people going to vote for Trump? What is this actually like? I'll believe this when is it enough to have people start going, but the left? Uh-huh. Is this enough to have people wake up and start saying, instead of, oh, but the right, look and be like, okay, but the left is actually like Nazis? Or is it just more of the same?
I don't know, because I'm a moron.
Yeah. I don't know either. All I know is that may God have mercy on our soul. Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank our composer, Jared Elias, my co-producer and cousin, Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.